Hello, and welcome to Biddeford Today. I'm your host, Roger Urchebes. Today I have two special guests. To my left is Mayor Alan Casavant, and to his left is Mayor Roland Michaud. And today we're going to be talking about what's happening here in the two cities of Biddeford and Saco. And welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
Alan, how many years have you been the mayor of the city of Biddeford?
I'm finishing my 5th year.
You're finishing your 5th year. And Roland?
Well, I'm finishing my first year after a hiatus of 3 years, and I was the mayor before that for 4 years.
4 years.
So this is actually my 5th year, but I had a 3-year break in the middle.
Oh, you took a vacation, right?
I did. I joined the school board for vacation.
I put a few questions together, and I'd like to see what you people have to say about it. My first question is, what do you think of a third bridge for the cities of Biddeford and Saco, a vehicle bridge? What do you people feel about that?
Well, let me just make a couple of comments, if I could, from
Sure.
a little historical perspective.
Okay.
In fact, we really do have 3 bridges already.
Okay.
But one of them is a paid bridge, and that's the main turnpike. Because we would do the main turn. Historically, years ago, the main turnpike came to us and wanted to put a toll barrier, if you recall, in Scarborough. And the city of Saco was not in favor of that at all, because we felt it was putting a barrier between us and Portland as an expense. But we actually do have a third bridge. If you think of the main turnpike authority as a shortcut between Biddeford and Saco, I use it quite frequently myself, so it already is there in one way. Would we have another third bridge? I know historically at one time they looked at one perhaps in the Camp Ellis area. Going
Right,
over the hill.
that's what I'm coming to.
Right. That is unlikely to happen. With the environmental impacts implications of something like that, I just don't see that as a possibility. It could, but I doubt it. Other locations are not that plentiful in reality. So to actually have a third bridge, a real new third bridge, if it's going to happen, I suspect it's going to be a ways out there. I think the better alternative is to look at how we can improve mass transit, local ability to get around in town easier and more effectively to try to deal with the existing traffic and encourage people to use other means of transportation. Because to build a third bridge, environmentally would be a challenge.
And the cost.
Fiscally would be an enormous challenge. And geographically, where would the location be? I think would also challenge us as well.
Because there's been a lot of rumors, a lot of talk over the years about a third bridge. Some people saying we need one, things of that nature. And you're right about Camp Ellis. They were looking at that stretch down there, and that's the reason I brought it up, because today's a lot of traffic, and there's a lot of things, constructions, things like that, delays, and that's what. But a lot of people are feeling that they live up that way. They felt there needs to be a shorter route for them to go.
Well, I know for me where I live on Meeting House Road, which is off the Pool Road. It's pretty frustrating if I want to get to Camp Ellis, and I can almost see it from my driveway.
Right.
But yet I have to drive all the way around. And of course, if I go at certain hours, whether it's lunchtime or we say 5 o'clock, it's jammed from the main street in Biddeford right through Saco. It's just bumper to bumper and really, really slow. So if you're in a hurry, you're not going to get there too quickly. On the other hand, Ron's exactly right. I think the environmental impact, the cost impact, and the disruption of neighborhoods, it's never going to happen.
Okay. What do you think of the mills being revitalized?
Good, Alan.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think, growing up in the city of Biddeford and Saco, I never imagined the mills to be what they are today. I mean, they're very diverse with all types of businesses in there, and of course, there's all types of apartment units. It's going to increase the density of the downtown. It's going to be a major attraction to both downtowns. I think it gives us a special identity that we don't have. I just think it's a huge asset because in terms of generating tax revenue and in terms of redevelopment, if you look at the possible impact throughout both cities, it's the mill districts in both communities they're going to be the driving force of our economy.
Roland?
Oh, I got to agree with Alan 100%. It's a fascinating process to watch because you consider that many of our parents worked in there in the mill industries or the tanning industries or whatever was there historically. And we're coming along as a different generation. All those industries have gone. Now we're saying, what are we going to do with this? Well, what we're doing is making it a center of our community, rejoining what was already there in a more effective way, providing additional housing, entertainment opportunities, dining opportunities. But it really is it's the center of who we are. I had the opportunity to live in the Burlington area back in the early 80s. In Winooski, a small little mill town, the dome capital of the world at one time was going to be, had the very beginnings of mill development there on the Winooski River. And I saw how incredibly effective and attractive they were. And you look at Lawrence, you look at Lowell, you look at Haverhill, you look at out there in Springfield, you see mill developments occurring everywhere. We're fortunate because our mills are right on the river. They're combined, the communities, the Riverwalk Bridge that was put in last year that crosses, connects the communities finally. It's really one downtown. And with time, I believe more and more people want to live in the downtown area, and we're going to have that cross-cultural connections, the economic connections between the two communities, and it makes it a place to want to be part of and live in. I mean, a lot of our millennial generation, my kids, my children, especially my daughter, they want an urban environment. They want to be able close to where they're going to go out to eat. They want to be able to shop locally. They like living in a centralized facility community. That's what Biddeford Saco is slowly becoming in the mill area.
Because we're looking at a newer generation coming in.
We are, and it's funny because it was our past and it's our future. And we're in the present, working our way through the future, redeveloping the past in a different format, but as thriving as it was historically.
You were absolutely right about Lawrence and Lowell, because I travel that road quite often on 495, and over the years I've seen it numerous times from where it's been to where it is. And it's unbelievable what they've done with those mills. It's the same thing with both cities. On your side of the river, on the Saco side, what about the apartment complexes and all that's being built right now or being revitalized? What do you think of that for your potential growth in the city?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I've watched the development. I was on the planning board back in the 80s when Gavin Rotella came up with his first proposal. And so I've got a lot of history in watching it develop. And in Saco, we sort of went with the larger developer. It was going to be Gavin. Then the Matson Group came in after we have a 10-year hiatus. We're going to do a massive development. Whereas on the Biddeford side, it was done a lot with Doug Sanford and his initiative and incentive piece by piece. So it developed in very different formats. But they're all developing in the simultaneous concept of housing, recreational abilities, and you know, sort of active communities together. So I look at the Chinburg development and say, well, finally Mill Building 4 is being developed. But we've had offices and professional spaces in there for in Mill Building 2, for example, for 20 years. I worked there for many years myself. So, and I know the beauty and the value of working in a place like that. You go to work upstairs, you're on the river, the views were beautiful, the sunrises in the morning were gorgeous. There was a deli downstairs, walked down the back, there was going to be some shopping which never really came to fruition. All the new restaurants in Biddeford, the run-of-the-mill in Saco. It's really, I've seen it develop in the last 20 years, and I know it'll continue in that direction. It has its ups and downs like everything else does, but it's always been moving in the positive direction.
Now, your transportation center, which is located right up on York Hill, what is your view on that?
Now, we as a community a few years ago committed to trying to make this a green rail station. In fact, it was the most environmentally sound station in all of the Amtrak in the Northern Corridor. And we spent a fair amount of effort and time to put a train station in there. I think it's an ideal location. It's close to our downtowns. Now at the bridge, it's actually accessible from Biddeford. It's a bit of a walk, but not too bad. And I think it's going to serve us well into the future. As I said earlier, we've got to be thinking about other means of transportation other than vehicles. And the Amtrak system is an alternative. I used to go to Boston. It would have been nice if we had a north to south station connector in Boston, which we probably will never see in our lifetime, but it still is the tool that we use to get around, and I think it was a great asset to both of our communities.
Alan, about the Riverwalk. Now, we know it's in different stages. Let's talk about the Riverwalk in Biddeford.
Well, you know, I was thinking of that because last night at the council meeting we talked about the Riverwalk and how it's going to continue from Mechanics Park on both sides of the river, but then eventually shoot all the way across Elm Street. So it's a pretty large or long area. I was thinking how when I was a kid, I didn't even know the falls existed, because it was all walled off and you really didn't see much of it unless you walked on the Main Street Bridge and looked up. You could see something, but you didn't see the natural beauty that you can see today. So for example, if you're on the pedestrian bridge and walk across that, you can get a great view of the falls, or if you have a beer at Derigo Brewing, you're right there. And so it's really special. And it's my belief that it's important, at least in terms of economic development, that you maximize your natural resources. And the river and the falls are unique and they're special. So being able to weave a publicly accessed riverwalk through the maze of the mills and along the river from Main Street all the way to Elm Street, I just think that's not just an economic driver, but I think in terms of recreation, it's a huge plus because it's beautiful. And in the conceptual plans of last night, we were talking not just about the creation of more boardwalk space and walking distance, but actually additional pedestrian bridges so that people can zigzag across between Biddeford and Saco in order to reach their destination.
I thought for the different bridges, I thought that was very beneficial, the walk bridges. When I watched the meeting last night, it was Greg Tansley was talking about the different, putting one or two more walk bridges connecting Saco, and that would have, that was really nice.
The two that they were talking about, one would be in what the new area where they just got redeveloped called the Plaza. It hasn't been really open to the public yet because there's still some issues that have to be resolved.
Right.
But one would be there, and one would be by where the train station is, the train bridge.
Okay, well, let's talk about what do you think of the Saco River, and what would you like to see for the Saco River that needs to be done?
Well, I think Al and I, as communities, have been working together for one of the major issues that needs to get done, and is the dredge of the river. And we've been working at this again with our friends at the Corps for a bit of time, and hopefully maybe in the next year or two we'll start to see what we need. The river is a great asset. It's also a commercial asset for both communities, and we need to find a way to get the Corps to fund the dredging that should have occurred actually a number of years ago, because it is a great opportunity. We have Rummer's Boatyard at the upper end of the river. We have the fishermen on both ends of down, on the Saco side especially, where our fishermen. The river needs to be cleaned out, needs to be made more available. And over time, we could market the river to people passing up on the ocean side to come in and maybe spend a night in downtown Biddeford, tie up at the Rummer's Boatyard or a marina and actually spend time down there. Because people on boats taking leisurely trips in the summertime, it's a bit of a drive up or sail up from the mouth of the river, but it is doable, and I've done it myself not in a boat, but in a just paddling up there, but it's a beautiful sight. It's a gorgeous thing to do, and I think with time we could possibly market even going from the train station downstream. Because we have a train station. I've always felt we could bring people in from Massachusetts, bring them to the train station. You want to go to Funtown, off to Funtown. You want to go down Camp Ellis or Biddeford Pool, down you go. You want to go down the river in a kayak, here you go. We could start marketing that on a more repetitive basis, and I think it'll become a real asset to the community.
Alan?
I just think that the Saco River is a huge asset. I mean, you think back historically, and you begin to realize that there were actually boatyards that built these large sailing ships, at the turn of the century, 1900 or so, on that river. So they had much more depth than it does today. And today, of course, what was it, about a month ago, we were on the Saco and with the councils, and of course,
Saw that in the paper.
Sometimes you look out and you realize that there's not much water there any longer because of all the sand that's built up. And I think getting the river dredged is huge. But again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about taking advantage of our natural assets. The Saco River is beautiful, and it's been well preserved because of the Saco River Corridor Commission and other agencies. And even for us in terms of recreation, we've had for the last couple of years a festival on the Saco River, River Jam that both of us have worked on and both the Main Street organizations have worked on. A lot of fun, a lot of entertainment, and I've been saying since I've been mayor that we're essentially one community. We have two cities, one community sharing one river.
That's right.
And why don't we use that river to be able to maximize our sense of community by getting together, socializing, and having a good time?
Because years ago, there was tourist boats. They used to come down towards the bottom where the bridge is, and they load them up with 500-600 people. And at that time, there was no vehicles hardly or anything like that. And the people would go down there, and they would go up the river, up to Biddeford Pool, things of that nature, and come back down. I went on the river quite a few years ago. I went on there once in my lifetime, and I thought it was gorgeous. And there's so much potential. If the river is dredged properly and done right, you probably could get some fairly good-sized boats in there. Even coming out of Portland, coming down the river as a tour boat and anchoring down at the bottom of the bridge down there, somewheres down there, and visiting the Biddeford Saco area. That's what I think I'd like to see. And I think it can be done. It will be. I'm sure it will be done down the road.
Well, if you get a vibrant downtown where people live here, and you do the trails to see, so they can really see the environment that they're living in. I mean, you can go to your apartment and not look out and not see anything, but if you really get out, walk the trails on the side of the river, see the beauty of the river and the possibilities, that builds on its own. And over time, the message gets out. Not only is this a great place to live, you can recreate in your own backyard. Walk out your door, take a kayak and go down the river, go down to Camp Ellis or Biddeford Pool and come back at the end of the day. Park your kayak in your backyard, go up to your apartment, you're done. That is an incredible lifestyle that people, particularly the younger folks, would enjoy, and I think that potential is there. So, but we've got to, we recognize it's a great asset. We just got to make sure we need to treat it with the respect it needs, but also the maintenance that it needs on an ongoing basis.
Oh, I agree, Alan. Can't think that more.
I totally agree. I just think it's a huge asset.
Oh, it is. It's very
and the point is, you know, both cities have worked really closely with this. I thought the teamwork exhibited by Saco and my side of the river has been exemplary. I mean, it's just a question of getting federal funding because there's no way that we could ever fund something like that with both communities. So having the federal government involved is essential to it all.
There's a lot on the Saco side that's, right now it's just a lot, but there's potential for development up there. Can you elaborate a little bit more into that?
You mean the east side of the island here in Saco?
Yeah, on Saco Island, yeah, on the east side.
The east side. Well, you know, that's an area that had a history. Historically, the first project proposal was to put in high-rise condominiums in there.
Okay.
That was Gavin's proposal way back in the 80s. That sort of fell apart when the whole system went down. The new Matson group came in 2007, basically with a similar proposal, saying, well, let's put high-end condominiums. It's going to be a gated community. They're going to put a marina in the river, which requires some dredging to do. So, but they've talked about that. Now, that's a piece of property. I mean, you can have a lot of different opinions in the community about what should happen. Some people have articulated to me the desire, why doesn't the city own that? What an enormous asset that would be if we made it a nice big park with launches for folks to come in and go downstream, matches Mechanic Park across the way. And that's something, personally, I would love to be able to do, because I think what we leave to our children and grandchildren is land. If we have that ability to leave them some open property or space that they can use in perpetuity, that's probably as important as anything else we do, because you can't recreate it. And once it's in private ownership, where it'll be there. Whereas if we make efforts when we're around to improve the environment and leave our children and grandchildren something that they can use in perpetuity, that's really worth something to consider. Is it doable? There's always so many variables involved in the process. I would not say yes or no. Others have said, let the private market take it over. I mean, certainly condominiums would generate a lot of revenue to our community, no question about it. There'd be some small traffic impacts, but not significant. So there's an attractive act to that as well. Now, if you could combine the two some way, that would probably be the ideal, but we're not there yet. It's going to take a lot of discussion and people's willingness to take chances, and you never know how that turns out till you start down that path.
Because I remember that lot as a coal yard years ago.
Right, and there are environmental concerns, exactly, and that's why people say, you don't want to buy that because you don't know what you're going to run into when you do environmental remediation. You're talking to a community that's had 2 Superfund sites that were remediated, which is unusual, but we had 2 we took care of. And we've also had issues on the island when we tore down the old hide house on top of the island. We had remediation issues. We had to deal with that because it was once a tannery.
That's right.
So as a community, we've had experience in dealing with these issues. We're fully capable of addressing them. My wish would be that. The reality may be radically different. I don't know. But I think that east side of the island has enormous potential.
Because it gets falls over there too in the back.
Oh, I know.
there.
I've been on the
Beautiful.
island. It's a gorgeous island. Go down to the end. Kids are fishing out there a lot in the summertime.
I did it as a child.
You know, imagine
It was
that.
quite a few years ago. I'm not going to say how old I am, but quite a few years ago.
But imagine that developed appropriately with green space and picnic space and parking and boat launching
Right.
it would be a huge attraction.
Oh,
Yeah.
Again, another question.
I just need a loan now. If you got a few bucks, we can borrow some.
But you have a good idea. I love that idea. Will we see it? Well, I don't know. The other question is, I guess, both cities have different organizations. One is the Heart of Biddeford. The other is Saco Main Street. What do you think of a joint merger between the two? And what do you think of Biddeford Saco Chamber of Commerce?
I think we've talked about this to some degree. I mean, in terms of economic development and even the Main Street. One of the things that's striking is, of course, I've always believed that Saco's Main Street and the Biddeford Main Street are really the same Main Street. I'd like to see a better transportation system between, so people can go up and down much easier. I don't know if it's that easy though to merge the two Main Street organizations. I mean, they have their own individual charters. And sometimes I think in terms of economic development, whether it's on Main Street or more global in terms of the entire city, I think it's something to talk about, but yet it puts the person in charge in some sort of hot seat per se, because if it's perceived as that person being more attentive to one community or as opposed to the other, then it can create a problem. I think it's important that both Main Street organizations work together, because again, like for example with River Jam, both directors were deeply involved in doing that and they pull it off perfectly. I just think that in terms of collaborating is one thing, but I think in terms of individual identities and the uniqueness of both communities, that's a little bit more difficult to navigate. So I'm not sure we're quite there yet.
Okay. Ron?
Well, you know, it's interesting because HOB and Saco Main Street are really volunteer organizations. They work with the cities. The cities help fund some of those costs. But Saco, I know, which was one Saco Spirit, now known as Saco Main Street, was a spontaneous development on Saco. A number of businesses got together and decided to create this entity. It wasn't city-driven. We worked with them in creating it, but it was volunteers. I think HOB runs basically the same way, based on volunteers. And there is a natural, I mean, if you're a small entrepreneur on Main Street in Biddeford and you're a small entrepreneur on Main Street in Saco, you are competing to a point for the same customers. So there's that internal competition, which is not bad. It's healthy. I mean, it's not like we are ultimately competing externally, but internally there's some little competition as well. I think cooperative development is the way to go. We're a long ways, I think, from having one development entity in that respect, because there are different perspectives of both communities. If we honor those differences and work together collectively, we can get the best out of both. Cooperation, and yet local competition is good too sometimes. You want competition because competition sharpens the edges, but cooperation deals with the negatives of competition. Putting them together like we have been the last couple of years, I think, is a better way of doing it, at least for now. Okay. 20 years from now, I can't say, but for now it seems to be working, and each working together in cooperative opportunities and individually in maintaining their community atmospheres, I think is a good thing.
Because I did see a joint venture between the two of them. I was watching on the CNN channel, and they created a promotional tape, and it would appear on CNN because it, like Fox or things of that nature, as far as it goes on. And both directors were there, and I thought they both did an excellent job.
Yeah, they do. They work well together.
Both promoting the cities of Biddeford and Saco. I thought they did an excellent job doing it. The film was beautiful. It was unbelievable what they'd done. And they also, too, they advertised the events for the summer and fall at the same time. That was on that promo, and I thought they did an excellent job with it. Now, how about the Biddeford Saco Chamber of Commerce and Industry? What are your views on that?
Well, they're an organization of entities in the community that want to participate in there, and they're Biddeford Saco. Again, they work with us. We do. I mean, I've known Craig forever, the current chairman of the group. They work with the communities in when they have common interest, and it helps all communities. I don't think they're Biddeford Saco. I remember when they used to be up in the old by the Pepperell Mill. Years ago when the Chamber of Commerce was in town. In fact, I rented space from them years ago. They've been a great organization. They're good to work with, and I think they're working fine as Biddeford Saco. I'm not a direct member.
No.
I go to their meetings occasionally, not as probably as much as I should, but they're there. And just as the Rotary, we have different Rotaries. I think they all work together for the community's benefit.
Great. Alan?
Same thing. I think that the chamber members represent a lot of the movers and shakers in the cities of Biddeford and Saco. They're great partners for my office, just as the Heart of Biddeford is. I mean, if I look at them and the Rotary Club, you look at the individuals involved, I just think that I couldn't get done a lot of the things that I get done without the volunteers and the energy that the chamber and the Heart of Biddeford and the Rotary Club deliver on a weekly or even a daily basis. I think they're really critical in our discussion. Craig Pendleton does a real solid job in terms of energizing his group. And again, if I have a problem or if I have a need, if I call him up, if he can do something, he's right there. So I think he's a huge ally, and I think the chamber's a huge ally.
Great. I know that the city of Biddeford has started to look into architectural design looking for a parking garage. Does the city of Saco plan to look at one as well?
There are no formal plans in place to look for a parking garage at this time. I mean, it's been talked about. We threw it around on Saco Island, where the train station is, for example, where the big parking lot is, that Chimberg will be using as well, should we have one in there. But right now, there's no concrete plans for a parking garage at this time in Saco.
Okay. Alan, what do you think about for what the...
Well, of course, I think the dynamic's a little bit different. We're under considerable pressure in Biddeford to have some sort of parking, mainly because of the way Main Street's aligned and also because of the rapid expansion within the Mill District. Doing nothing, from my perspective, is not an option at this juncture. We have to do something. We have a couple hundred cars on the main energy site at this juncture on any given day. We want to develop the main energy site, so we've got to move them someplace. We have a number of leases in place with the lofts in Saco Falls. Tim Harrington has indicated his willingness also to lease. So there's two important facts, I guess. Is one, that we're going to have to build it, but if we build it, it will not fall in the property tax base whatsoever. Users will end up paying for that. And I think that just in terms of economic development, it's critical if we're going to develop the main energy site and also have the maximized potential in the Mill District. We have to have adequate parking for them, because I don't know, ever since I've been mayor for 5 years, numerous people have come to my office, small businesses and lately some large businesses, and looking to expand or looking to develop, and their question always falls back on, well, what about parking? And when you say, well, we have no concrete plans, or they look at the scenario, that gets them jittery. If you want to get investment, you got to have the infrastructure to serve that investment, and the parking garage is going to be one of those needs.
Because on the last program that you were on with Mr. Bennett, we did discuss that, and of course Main Street in Biddeford, of course, years ago it used to be doctors, lawyers up there and above, and today's all apartments, and each building is close together. They don't have no parking spaces, and also too, the people coming into town on certain evenings, it's pretty hard to find a parking spot.
I don't want to discuss Biddeford's parking as an issue, but I want to discuss parking as a concept. If you look at a successful community nearest to us that's really drawn tourism incredibly well, is Portsmouth. You look at, I remember the Portsmouth of the 60s is very different than the Portsmouth today. And they've been incredibly successful. But what do they have? They have tremendous parking abilities. You drive in, they have the parking garage right off of Market Street. Mm-hmm. 2-level, 3-level garage. It's full many times on the weekends.
Yep.
And it's very, you don't see it. It doesn't stand out in the community. Some ugly structure is built into the side street, and it's incredibly effective because I talked about mass transit, but I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to have huge mass transit a la Boston anytime soon in the Biddeford South area. But we need to be thinking about how to do it on a long-term basis. But without parking, people will not necessarily want to come down and participate, particularly on the weekends when people go out and recreate. So we need to find tools there. I can envision a day, if we were creative enough with pedestrian bridges, to have maybe a parking area that would serve both communities somehow. Because if the downtown areas are where we're looking to expand, it'd be nice to find a way we could do it in a joint effort to say, you can access both areas from a centralized parking facility. I'm not telling Biddeford to build one. That's their call. It's certainly in.
Saco's willing to fund one though in Biddeford, aren't they?
Yeah,
Well,
we-
I'm still getting, I'm looking for
Now
my
we
loan
have
now.
you on
Wait a
tape,
minute.
Roland. We have you on tape now, so
I already borrowed money from Biddeford, so we're broke. But I mean, down the road, the cities, both cities need to be thinking, how do we make this, if we're really one community downtown, we really need to address this, comprehensively. To say, the cars are going to be part of who we are, I think, probably, unless Uber takes everything over for quite a few more years, we need to be thinking how to do it effectively.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
I remember the one in Portsmouth. I've been there quite a few times, parked over there, and of course they have businesses around that, and of course the businesses, their space pays for that parking garage as well, because and it's really well designed, and I've been
Excellent,
there over a half a dozen times, and it's unbelievable. It's right there, and you wouldn't even know it's in.
But you know what's interesting, Roger? I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I went to Portsmouth with Delilah and some other members of Heart of Biddeford, and we went and talked to various business owners because we wanted to see about their interest in coming to the Biddeford Saco area. And when we talked to them, they said, because we noted the changes that took place in Portsmouth, they said two things happened. One, the garage got built, and two, they put in a hotel. And that changed the entire
Sheraton was
dynamic
huge over
of
there.
Portsmouth. It just changed, just as you said. With
That's
those
right
two
too. The
things.
hotel was right, Alan.
Yeah.
That was the Hilton, the Sheraton Hilton
Harborside,
over
I think
there.
they call it, yeah.
Yeah, and that's huge, and it's
Huge is
always
right.
full, and they got quite a few things going on over there in Portsmouth. What do you think of the joint workshops between the two cities of Biddeford and Saco that you people are working with the councilors and things of that
I
nature?
love them. You know, when Mayor Pylon was in office, we had tried to do some of that, but there was no consistency to it. And what we've done this year is we have a common ordinance now where we will meet twice a year as a joint council to talk about issues. And the first meeting we had, for example, I thought was extraordinary in the Mill District, where it was a brainstorming session and a get to know you type of session. And I thought just in that one meeting, we had some extraordinary relationships that developed, because I think that's important, that if you're going to work with someone, you got to get to know them. Subsequently, what we've done is have monthly meetings with a subcommittee where we talk about particular issues on any, that are ongoing. But being able to reach out to people in Saco, I have some great relationships with the mayor, of course, but also with individual councilors, and I feel comfortable in discussing any issue with them. So I think in terms of developing this sense of a Twin City community, having those meetings are refreshing and necessary. And I envision that that's going to happen even more and more as we move forward, especially if we start talking about consolidations and collaborations.
Right. Yeah. Roland?
I'll just echo what Alan has said, basically. I mean, how more eloquent can you be? He's right. You get to know people, you can work with them and relax about the whole thing and,
Right.
and deal with it on the issue versus the personalities. And I think it's been incredibly helpful. We just had our second meeting, our second joint meeting, and we took a boat trip up and down the river. That was the second full council meetings. We have them twice a year, and I think problem is the council will turn over every 2 years in Saco, and I know
Same thing in Biddeford.
every 2 years. So having this kind of an operation is good, just to break down the barriers of knowledge who you are. So at the very least, we created an ordinance. In fact, I brought a copy of it right here that created these repetitive meetings, and it really pays off in the long term.
That's
So.
great. Yeah, because I was on it when we first started out. I was with Alan on the council, and we just started out. It was 2014. We started gradually working our way into it and looking at all the aspects to save the taxpayers' money in the two cities. And I believe that there is areas there we can save, but looking more in depth into it. Because right now you people have already have using the assessor to both cities are using the same
Shared assessor. first
sharing
time
the
we've
same
ever done
assessor,
it, yeah.
which is a big thing, and also to the tri-community camera machine that they're using for the sanitations for the sewers, that's been there for a good number of years, and it's been working really well with the communities. There is a lot of things out there that the two cities will look at very carefully. Because I know Governor LePage had has been stressing more than once, like Auburn, Lewiston. He's mentioned those cities before. You got to work together. You got to go with a cost savings somewhere along the line, and it can be done. But the only thing is how do you go about
Well, the
it?
thing is that it can be done, but you have to be very careful about doing that because you got to break down some barriers. That's why
That's right.
the assessor was so important. Not that it saves a lot of money,
No.
but it's an example that we did something and it's working. So
Right.
it sets the tone for other things. I remember when I was in the city council back around 1990, when you talk about the sewer camera, for example, I remember having that discussion. And it was a meeting in Saco City Hall, and we had the camera, and there was some conversation about sharing it. And I remember some of my staff, not my staff, but the city staff, getting up saying, well, what if we want to use the camera at the same time that they do? This will never work. So it took years before they actually began to share that camera. And I say that because we've had general conversations that people do some brainstorming about talking about whether it's a common economic improvement director, some sort of better relationship between the fire and police or whatever. It's good to talk about those things and break down those cultural barriers that might separate the two communities. But at the same time, you want to move slowly enough so that you don't have unintended consequences. You want to make sure that you can predict exactly what's going to happen when you start moving those two entities together.
As we know, like that the unions, things of that nature, but as far, you can go on a smaller version, and whatever is not unionized or anything of that nature, you look into the other aspects of what you can save, different things.
Well, we're talking, like, for example, when you were on the committee,
Right.
No, the subcommittee.
Sorry, excuse
Did
me.
that on purpose, I know. We talked about a common bay washing bay.
Yes.
And we're still talking about that with where a structure would be constructed in Saco, would be shared by both communities, but the idea being that you'd be able to drive your larger vehicles in during various times and pressure wash the undercarriage so that you could expand the life of those particular vehicles.
Right.
So it's taken 3 years and we're still moving in that particular direction, but it's not smooth. It's kind of...
Because we're talking vehicles, you're talking vehicles. Because right now, both cities, they seems like they're both working together with almost like the similar type of vehicles, like the police, fire departments,
Oh, yeah.
the same thing. It's almost similar. It's almost identical to everything. Even I don't know much about public works, but I do know that almost right now it's going to be similar for both cities.
In the past, we've worked with Biddeford in buying fire trucks, same type of truck, or same company, same supplier. We've certainly done with the police. And it's there's a long-term relationship that's been in place as well. But some of the other things we've looked at, for example, is we had the opioid grant. It was a joint community grant that we worked together to get that money to help deal with some of the opioid issues. The issue about the washing bay, Saco allocated in our budget a certain number of dollars to begin that process. So we've already moved beyond just saying, let's work with them. We've already started to figure out how we're going to fund that operation as it moves forward. We had our mayor's ball. Alan says, when I first got elected, hey, I'd just like to do a mayor's ball. I'm saying, you talking, look at those. I wear sneakers most of my time. I don't dance. But we did, and we raised some money, and I got to give Alan and the staff in Biddeford especially a shout out for what a lot of work they did in HOB to put it together. But it was I had a good time. It was a Saco Biddeford Mayor's Ball. Not the Biddeford Ball, the Saco Biddeford Mayor's Ball. We did that. And we've talked about newspapers. Now, one of the issues we get a fair number of complaints about is, and this is not an attack on the suppliers of the product, but some newspapers will lie it on your, in a plastic bag on your doorstep or your driveway. And we've gotten a number of complaints over the years about that. And we've looked at it back and forth. But whatever policy Saco does or whatever policy Biddeford does, we have to work together because the suppliers work in both communities, and they don't want to be dealing with different regulations in two communities that make it impossible for them. So those are the simple little issues like that.
That's right.
But if you're on the Courier or the Journal side, say, gosh, I don't need two regulations to deal with it. Maybe one would be better. So that's by working together you deal with a lot of that.
Yeah, because when I was on the council before, we had discussed that. It was in its early stages, and trying to figure out which way. And we had talked to the two newspapers, but it went quietly. But now you people have seen both of you people have seen that you have reactivated this to make sure.
Well, you get the complaints from the public, and I got to say the suppliers of the product make an effort to manage it as best they can, but it isn't always successful, and it seems to have valleys and hills and valleys.
Well, I want to tell you something. The Sunday paper they throw around, 1 week I'll get it, the next week I won't get it for 2 or 3 weeks.
Don't know what to say on that.
So no, I really don't care. But you see it once and then you don't see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you see it in so many places. They have half a dozen in some houses just thrown there.
Right.
And besides that, winter is coming, and you would be
It's a chronic
surprised.
complaint we receive from the public, so it's something we need to keep working on to try to ameliorate it.
Right, and the snow mound that used to be where Rotary Park is, you'd be surprised how many, when it comes down to springtime, how many newspapers you find in that pile.
I think last night at the council meeting, Council Reddy, who chairs the policy committee, indicated that because of some recent complaints regarding the newspapers, that they had reviewed a policy, and I think they're sending it to Saco.
We did. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I saw it in my email. Yeah,
That's the whole idea about that common.
that's a good idea to do it because we can work together. It's better for all of us.
The next question is, do you foresee any more joint ventures between the two cities for cost savings?
I don't think the ventures are ever going to end. I think, as Alan pointed out very clearly, you have to propose something. Well, we have these meetings, and so counselors and the public or whoever wants to propose an idea, we look at to see what we can do to complement each other. For example, we've looked at the codes issue and the building permit issues. We're looking, in Saco's perspective, we'll look at impact fees, how they compare to neighboring communities, to try to standardize a lot of this stuff. That way there shouldn't be a barrier to anybody coming in. The code should be fairly similar. Building codes should be building codes, looking to see if we can adopt a similar code. So there's a lot of little steps that people don't necessarily see. It's not headlines. Codes are the same. But it has an incredible value to developers. They come in town, they know it's the same codes in both communities, don't have to muck around with what does he do versus what she does. That type of stuff pays long-term dividends. Don't get the headlines, but they really get the job done.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things going on. For example, as you well know, the fire departments of both communities work really well together. So there's a structure fire or something like that, and both departments show up. They essentially act as one department while they're there. The same is true in terms of ambulance service. If there's a incident that takes place, we'll say in Saco, and the Saco ambulance is tied up, the Biddeford ambulance will respond. So there's a lot of mutual things taking place. Can we do more? Probably, but again, as I said earlier, the key is to get the idea proposed, but then work it through and talk about the possibilities as well as unintended consequences.
What do you think of your trash and recycling programs in your cities?
I love it. I think that was a huge change that we implemented a few years ago. The next phase is going to be removing of compostable materials because that's heavy and it takes a lot of space. The public fell in love with what we're doing, so I think it was a huge plus putting that in place a number of years ago.
Roland?
Well, as you know, we had a big issue when we were a Merck recipient of their services, and we walked away from them years ago. Creating economic incentives so they would leave our community, but we went to curbside recycling and pickup. And it's probably the best thing we ever did in the community as far as waste management. Now, our recycling has peaked. We went up real quickly for recycling, was sort of petered out. And Alan's right about a lot of the compost waste that we don't recycle, et cetera. But I just stop back and think where we were before and where we are now. The bags are gone, the pickups are controlled. You don't see the waste and litter on Monday mornings or Tuesday mornings. The seagulls aren't in your front yard spreading the garbage all around. And I look at neighboring communities that haven't implemented that. It's a little pricey to do initially, but the impact of the community overall, environmentally, maybe recycling didn't shoot through the roof, but boy, what a different environment it was from what it was before. And I'm probably one of the most proudest things I did. And I didn't do it, I was just on the council as part of it, but it was led by one of our councilors, Eric Cody, who really came up with this. And there's a weekly pickup, which with defined barrels for recycling and stuff. Now we've gone to single sort recycling. It's enormous. And people now take it for granted, but it wasn't that way that many years ago. And it's those little things. They're big when you implement them, but long-term pay enormous dividends.
They do. I lost my thought now. Oh yeah, okay, I got it back. In your city, you just implemented a ban on styrofoam cups. Can you go into details about the city of Saco with that project?
Well, of course, those are generic environmental issues. Styrofoam, plastic bags, and these types of issues are really, they're not innovative ideas, but they're ways that we feel as a community we need to move forward and saying long-term, has an impact. Styrofoam, the product doesn't break down as plastic bags don't break down. We're looking at plastic bag issues, single-use plastic bags as well. It's a transitional process. Other communities have done it rather successfully. And it's like, we don't want to make big headlines out of it. We just want to do what's right for the environment. Eliminating styrofoam is a good thing for the environment. Eliminating single-use bags is a good thing for the environment. You need to do it cautiously. You need to make sure you involve your businesses in town. They know the implications of what we're doing. But again, it's just a long-term investment looking out to the future and saying, you know, these are little things we can do so our grandchildren don't deal with the impacts of what we did to them when we were around. One thing being part of I was on the council for 14 years when we dealt with Superfund sites. We had we've had two of them, one on Flag Pond Road and on the Foss Road. What they told me is that our predecessors, our fathers and grandfathers, just threw it out there. They didn't, you know, we hauled how much waste out the Foss Road from the from the tanneries, from the shoe manufacturing, just burying it. The thought was, it's buried, it's out of sight, it's gone. Well, it wasn't. Now I came along, my later generation, we had to pay the cost of remediating the site because there was no recycling in. They just threw it in the ground. It taught me that when you do things, you got to look to the future as well. What are you doing, and what are its implications down the road? Because when we leave our children, if we leave them with more Superfund sites, a degraded environment, they're going to have to deal with it, and they're going to pay even more costs than had we done it right the first time. So that's one thing I feel strongly about. When you do things, think it out in the future as well. Not the cheapest thing always, but the best thing going forward that you can afford. It has to be affordable, but it can't be the cheapest alternative. And that's sort of what I felt right from the get-go.
Al, I know we're not working. I don't know if you're working on this project.
No, I mean, we're following what's happening in Saco, but there's been no pressure to do that. But I think that Ron's correct in terms of environmental advocacy, that it's important to be considerate of that type of thing. I mean, I remember, as you were talking, I remember a couple of things that, going back to my childhood, I remember, for example, going across the river, the tannery was active. Never mind the smell that was there, but I remember coarse colored water coming out into the Saco River. And, you know, again, I think our forefathers just dumped it thinking that nature would take care of it. I remember going to Rotary Park as a kid with my father. One of the thrills, I must have been 5, 6, 7 years old, and it was an open burn. And it was to get rid of lobster shells of all things because he didn't want them smelling up the garbage can. But driving through the road with fires on both sides, and I thought that was the coolest thing. But again, there was some environmental consequences to all that. So if we, at this juncture, can do things that save dollars down the road for our children, I think that's really important.
Well, you mentioned something about the Foss Road and what's the other road?
Flag Pond Road.
Right. Well, in Biddeford, we had the Rotary Park. And of course, years ago, that was the dump. And Gil Bushy, mayor at the time, visioned that as to create a park out of it. And look what he did. That was the city dump. And they went in there and they picked up as much they could find and cleaned it all up. And today we have a beautiful park up there.
It's good reuse of what was once abandoned property. And you see a lot of solar arrays put on Superfund sites. Like we've looked at it in Saco, haven't been able to find the right company yet. But Superfunds, unfortunately, because they're capped landfills, you can't do a lot of drilling into the ground because of the cap. So whatever you do in there has to be pretty superficial on the surface of the area. But there are uses you can put to it. But the sad thing is, and I don't blame our forebears, I had no clue about it. And it wasn't a thought process to say, what am I doing 50 years from now? It's gone. It's out of sight. I'm all set. But we need to be sensitive to that because the world is growing. The amount of earth is shrinking as far as per person space. And long term, if we don't think of that, we will not leave our grandchildren a place that they're going to be happy to live in.
I'm running pretty close. So what do you think of your school departments in your cities?
I think that the Biddeford School Department has improved dramatically in recent years. I think Jeremy Ray's done a superb job. You know, when he was hired for his economic sense, and he completely blew us all away because of his creative sense. Mm-hmm. He does both things very well. of course, a resident of Saco. But I think he's brought in a new team of principals and vice principals and has instilled a new sense of can-do attitude, a lot of new courses. So that I think if you look at the Biddeford School Department and you can compare it to any other school department, and again, if you look at the kids when they graduate, where they're going, I think that we're doing an exceptional job educating our children.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, I think Saco has a great system. We've gone through a number of superintendents. We have Dominic is in there now. Dominic's doing a good job. He's got a big issue to deal with. We've got to deal with a new school. And there's controversy in the community, a type of school, the size of the school, but we will eventually get it done. Awfully proud to have Thornton Academy as part of our community. I think Thornton's expansion, as we were talking about before we began, has been enormous in the last 20 years. The middle school services they provide, the dorm system they provide, the foreign students they brought in. I remember going to the very first dorm opening and saying how lucky we are in Saco to have our students to be exposed to their competitors. Which really, these students coming in from around the world are going to be the competitors of our children in the international marketplace of work that they're going to. And it's a great exposure they wouldn't get. Nothing. Biddeford Saco is sort of a quiet little area part of the world, and having these students coming in is a great opportunity. So I think Saco overall has a great educational system. We're fortunate to have Thornton Academy as part of it, but we also have a great elementary system, and you always care about your schools. It's what makes us important and makes us good. And each community has good systems in place with good leaders.
right. You need good leaders in today's world.
Oh boy, and how, even more so than ever.
Yeah. What are your goals for 2017?
Well,
Have you thought about it? Or is it too early to say?
Sometimes I get
And I don't
involved-
mean re-election either.
I think that there's a number of things. I mean, and we have to come to some sort of decision with in terms of a parking garage. I mean, again, as I said, I think a little while ago, doing nothing is not an option. The problem is there, has to be completed. When I first became mayor, that particular council wrestled with the issue, and we were on the verge of doing something. And at that juncture, I remember thinking, we're ahead of the curve on this. This is going to be good. Now we're behind the curve, and I think in order to maximize the potential of the downtown, and in order to stabilize the tax rate everywhere else, because of that stabilization of the downtown, the redevelopment, that a parking garage is inherent in whatever we do. So I think that the community has to come to some sort of resolution on that. I also think that we have to improve our infrastructure. You know, we've done some bonding in terms of roads. I mean, people always stop me. It's kind of funny, you know. For example, I live on Meeting House Road. And I don't know how many times in the last month they stopped when I'm out getting the mail. What's wrong with your road? I'm like, well, you know, I have so much power as mayor. And you can see that my road's not getting paved. It's one big speed bump. But there are roads even worse than that throughout the city, so that we have to do something with that, you know, also because historically Biddeford has always put infrastructure on a back burner in order to stabilize the tax rate. And then the Great Recession hit, and that made things even worse. So we're at a juncture today where, in terms of budgets and economically, I think we stabilize things, but we have to be very conscious at this juncture how we're going to be able to continue to invest in infrastructure at the same time stabilize that tax rate, because I don't see how we can increase that anymore. We have to have a little break here, so to speak.
One question I got to ask you. I'll go to you in a minute, please.
Sure.
What about City Hall, the tower at City Hall? Is there anything in the works for 2017?
Well, that's one of those things that's been neglected for so long, and the issue is not going away. I mean, the structure has problems. It has to be fixed. Now, it's gone to the voters twice since I've been mayor, been rejected both times. Putting it within the budget creates other problems, but it's one of those issues that, for me, has to be addressed. And we're always pursuing other options in terms of whether it's grants. And in this day and age, getting grants for public projects like that, it's not as easy as it used to be. But we have to do something with that.
And the reason your road's not tarred is because you're mayor.
No, it's because my cousin Guy is in charge of public works.
There it is.
I must have done something when I was a kid.
Payback.
Yeah.
Roland, what are your goals for
Well,
2017?
one of the goals I still have is when I work on a lot is to try to get our downtown vibrancy reawakened. It's coming along, but it was at one time a fairly vibrant downtown, and we've had a little bit of a downturn, and I want to see that come back to life to where it was before. I mean, we're seeing bits and pieces of it, but it's not to the point where I want it yet. I want people to want to come downtown, feel part of the downtown, and use it on a repetitive basis. That is to me one of the driving forces, because what brought me to Saco in the first place was this sense that when you come in town, you can feel like it is part of who you are, where you belong. And that's what I like about Saco and Biddeford. There's a downtown area you can really identify with. It's number one. Number two, which is a perennial issue, is always you got to work on the mill rate and make sure you stabilize it as best you can. Now, there's always the competing demand. I want my road paved, but I don't want to pay taxes. Well, you know, there's a balance there, and you have to try to mediate that balance between the extremes, so you're sort of in the middle, moving the community ahead every year, but not bankrupting people as you're doing it. The third one I'd like to get done, and I don't know if this will happen in my lifetime, but I keep hoping that by pushing the Corps of Engineers and moving forward on the Camp Ellis project, we will actually have, I'm hoping by the end of 2017, a signed final agreement with all the pieces in place. The only thing left to do would be to get the appropriation and the movement forward from the Corps, actually from Congress for the authorization. But we don't even have an agreement yet. The agreement's got to get in place, then the project can actually move forward, because I'm committed to hopefully getting this project at least off the ground and moving forward. And it's been a 20-plus year project, but we're closer now than we were 20 years ago, but we're not quite there yet. And I keep pushing that one every day as we're moving down the road. And of course, the big one that faces our children is the school system issue, but that's probably going to be on the back burner for another year, because the states are receiving the applications. By the time they rate them, it will be 2018 before the real issue will come up, whether we're selected or not, and where do we go from there. So that's 2 years down the road.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming.
Can I just add one thing before you cut us off?
Oh.
In terms of the downtown, again, I think it's really important to stress that Mayor Michaud and I both talk about the downtown as being important. There are some individuals that complain about that say that we're too downtown-centric sometimes. I would argue that the downtowns define a community. In other words, they're a source of pride about who you are. So if you have a vibrant downtown with restaurants and shops, walking spaces, river walks, whatever it happens to be, it makes you feel good about who you are, because anybody from the outside coming in looks at that and says, wow, this is really a good place to be. So when we think of Portsmouth, for example, which we mentioned, or the old port in Portland, or the wonderful stuff they've done in Kennebunk or Kennebunk Port, there's a character there. And I think the missions of both of us is to develop that character of the Twin Cities that we knew as kids, where both Biddeford and Saco were a source of attraction for everybody else, and you felt proud to be part of that. That's my biggest goal, to get that feeling back.
Okay. I want to thank you both for coming. I appreciate
Well,
it
thank you
very
for
much,
having
but
us.
I'd like to get you both on the hot seat again sometime down the road.
Can we reverse it and put you on the hot seat?
Anytime you want to. Thank you both for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm your host, Roger Hirschbees for Biddeford Today. Until next time, thank you for watching.